Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. First of all, I'm really thankful to CEsA and especially to the Alexandra Abreu for the invitation. And it's really a privilege for me for two reasons. The first is that I am presenting in my thoughts in my parent institute. And the second is that my supervisor is also a part of the panel where I am presenting. So this is a kind of really an honor for me. So thank you for the CEsA and especially to Alexandra for providing me this opportunity to share my thoughts over the conflict and development. So now can I share my slide?
Yes.
Can you see it now, please?
Yes.
Okay. Let me see if I can make it a bit.
F5.
Okay.
F5.
Okay, now, is it okay?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, so now is the Dr. Marcus talk about the theoretical orientation of the conflict and development, which was really interesting, and he raised a very pertinent questions regarding the conflict and development, especially related to the militarization of aid or the securitization of aid, or taking the aid in the context of the geopolitics, which is really interesting. This time I will focus more on the methodological side or the empirical side of the conflict and development when we talk about the aid. So today I'm going to present the Reclaiming Agency Navigating Security Dilemmas in Community Resilience in the post-conflict context. So the outcome of the presentation will be that how does the context sensitivity or the situated dilemmas matter to the people approval of the intervention, which is really important because people are the most important is to what Dr. Marcus also referred toward the human security or human-centered approach. So whenever we are talking about the post-conflict or post-conflict development or disaster, post-disaster intervention, so again, context sensitivity or the situated dilemma matters to the people approval. So we will talk about that as well in today's. And the second that what I am going to talk about is why local agency is important. Why basically local community is important in the post-conflict development intervention. Why the states and the international donor agencies or the donors should focus is on the local communities and the local agency, why they should have the power of the decision, planning, and implementation in the post-conflict development interventions. And then in the end, I will connect the thoughts of the Dr. Marcus to the Afghanistan and Pakistan case very briefly, that how basically the militarization of aid and how basically the securitization of the aid created in issues in Afghanistan that, if I am not wrong, can hypothesize that well, it couldn't achieve a 50% of the results. So that we are going to discuss later in the end part of the thesis. So when we're going to talk about the post-conflict development, so normally we see a kind of a change in the post-Cold War era, where when the community become an important, when the human security become an important, especially after the securitization theory presented by the Copenhagen School of Thought. So now a debate emerged among the local actors and international actors regarding the right-based approach to post-conflict development. They started debating that, okay, what can be the right-based approach? Should we go with the top-down model of the development, or whether should we go with the bottom of the development? So different scholars and different academicians and practitioners raised the questions that who will be the local basically. So that become an important question, whether the central government is the local, or whether the donors are the local, or whether the local community is the local. So still the debate is going on. So we will go to explore that what is the right-based approach and how it can be in the post-conflict development context. So most often, as we see in many cases like both in case of Pakistan, even, and in Afghanistan, and even in Iraq, and in many countries, that most of the interventions, the development interventions, are undertaken following a top-down model of the interventions. By top-down model of the interventions, I means that it's a technocratic planning when the local community has not been involved in the development interventions, in the planning, and in the decision, and in the implementation process of the post-conflict development. So it creates, a problem. When you are doing each and everything with the centralized planning, so without taking into the local consideration or without taking into the context of the security dilemmas, I am going to come later on to the security dilemma, but it creates an issues mainly because each society has a different context and each society has a different security dilemmas. But unfortunately, in most of the third world countries, all the development interventions, if not all, but at least 80 to 90% of the development interventions are normally, planned through centralized mechanism. Only technocrats are the people that we normally refer as expert knows best. And it means if I am a PhD doctor in development studies from ISEG, CEsA, so then I know each and everything. But I believe that no, situated dilemma is important to understand because every context has different sensitivity that must bring into the consideration before before designing any development plan for that particular community. So if you will exclude the community from the discussion, if you will exclude community from the planning or any kind of discussion that gonna to benefits the local community, and if they are not in the planning and decision making, so they will feel the approach or any models as an alien like. They will feel that it is not for us, and it creates in other way perception gap. And when the perception gap is created, when you and they think differently, then it's create grievances on the top of the already existing grievances. So what happens that most of the time, then your post-conflict development intervention failed in most of the countries, and they couldn't, or in other words, they couldn't achieve the desired result. So let me talk about the security dilemma, that what I mean in this paper by the security dilemma. By the security dilemma, I mean that every context, every situation has its own complexity and specific context challenges that arise from the various factors. And each community or each state or each society has a different context and different specific challenges that may not the other community face the same. So for example, every conflict has different interest. Different conflict parties have different interest in their orientation. So you cannot say that if, for example, Fabian, my class fellow, who is a Colombian, and he might have a different kind of conflicting interest, their parties will have different conflicting interest in comparison to the people in Afghanistan and Pakistan. So normally what we do in post-conflict development interventions, that we normally apply a centralized plan both in the context of Colombia as well as in the context of Afghanistan and Pakistan, which normally lead to the failure of the development, post-conflict development interventions. And then you have a different stakeholders in each conflict. You have a state there, and then you have a different non-state actors and different non-state actors have different agendas to pursue. So if you will come with the top-down model, then you will miss these agendas and create further grievances, and you are further escalating the conflict, or you are prolonging the conflict. To what Edward Azar in his theory of protected conflict theory says, that then you are not going to solve the problems, but you are trying to prolong the war. So that's what we are facing recently in what case studies I have been following. And the same, you have a different power dynamics. Each society has a different power dynamics. Some society have like, different tiers of the society, where there are chiefs in the society, where there are influential elders in the society. So you have to deal each case differently. And then the local knowledges. We also wrote a paper, I and Dr. Marcus wrote a paper that why basically the local knowledges are important in the post-conflict development interventions. Because each conflict or each country has a different local knowledges. And sometimes those local knowledges help you to solve the problems. So what is the problem of the international donors? That what, for example, with the United Nations, I worked with them in Pakistan for 1 year. And what I noted them that they are mostly trying to employ their own centralized agenda. They say, we have this project and this was beneficial in Sudan or in Eritrea, so might be working in Pakistan as well. So we have these things for the local community, and let's go and implement that. I always confronted them and I always challenged them that, well, the project that you might design for the Sudan or for the Eritrea or somewhere in Tanzania might not work in Pakistan, because the context is different, the local knowledge is different, the dynamic is different, the parties are different. So you have to go and come up with the bottom-up approach, where you are supposed to talk to the local community and bring them to the decision and implementation process. So by that way, you can have the desired result. So situated dilemma basically required a nuance understanding, adaptive thinking, and context-specific solution. So every situation has its own solution. So therefore, if we are going to bring a positive change in a post-conflict development context, we are supposed to focus more on the situated dilemmas. And then normally when we are focusing on the top-down interventions, so then definitely the locals, that they should be basically involved, and they should be the main the main stakeholders in the decision-making process, are normally denied, are normally being ignored. So by reclaiming agency, I always means that they should have the capacity to act and make the decisions. So what strategies for reclaiming should be that it should be a community-led initiatives. It should be the indigenization of development. Until and unless we didn't indigenize the development, the post-conflict development, if we didn't come up with the help of the local community, if we didn't involve them in the development interventions, you cannot get the desired result. So probably in some context, you may get some of the benefit from the development interventions, but you cannot achieve 100% of the results. So later on, I'll exemplify with in the case of Afghanistan as well. So on the other hand, we need to develop, the basic purpose basically is to develop the capacities of the local communities. Toward Huggenson in his theory of positive security refer as that until and unless we didn't work on the local capacities and capabilities, if we didn't eradicate, to what the Amartya Sen capability approach also says that until and unless we didn't work on the capacities and capabilities of the local community, till that time we cannot bring peace into those conflicting societies. So until we work to build the capacities of the people, to give them a livelihood, to give them the sense of belonging, to give them a sense of decision by bringing them into the mainstream, by that way we can build their capacities, and they can be more peaceful in orientation to avoid the conflicting ideas are going to be the recruits of the militants ideology or whatever the non-state actors. So empowerment, to what Ken Booth says, that emancipation should be always in the context of capacity development. So emancipation by that says that freedom from want. So if you go with the freedom from want to what Dr. Marcus also refers in the context of the human security, that so empowerment is important. So empowerment of whom? That is an important. So empowerment of the local community, because local community is one of the main stakeholders. I do not deny that state is also important. The liberal development model in some context, as we see that in the case of Afghanistan, the international community applied the liberal development model in Afghanistan, where they strengthen the institutions, democracy, human rights, but at the same time, they ignore the local community. So what we see in Afghanistan, that even the state institutions, or whatever we witness, that the state institution, the democracy even couldn't stand for a single day when the Americans left Afghanistan. So what happened, that Taliban easily take over the Afghanistan within a second? Why? Because they couldn't own the local community support. So I'm going to come to that later. So basically, subjective interpretation of the subjective view and perception is important. Subjective interpretation of the security, conflict, and development is important. So by that way, when there will be a subjective interpretation, automatically agency will be with the local community. So when for example, if the international community or the donors or the state want to build resilience, so by resilience, we need to bring social cohesion, and the social cohesion can only come with the community help. You cannot bring the social cohesion without the support of the local community. And the same is in the post-conflict context, in the post-conflict development context. I also witnessed 2-3 things in the post-conflict context, that even the international donors and even the international community and even somehow the state also mix the 3 phases of the interventions. For instance, they mix up development reconstruction with the humanitarian phase. Normally is what I have learned, or what I have even seen and what I have experienced, that humanitarian phase should be only for the humanitarian phase, and reconstruction should be for the reconstruction, and then prolonged development or sustainable development, that you want to continue the long development to the sustainable development, should be the long-term plan for the. But what I witness in many cases, even in Afghanistan, that in many cases, they also mix up humanitarian aid with the development aid. So on the one hand, there is a humanitarian aids going on, but on the other hand, some of the agencies are involved in development. So they mix up the things, which is also creates negativity, not only in terms of the donors, but also in the context of the local community. So positive security is important. Once you build the capacities, as I said earlier, then most probably there is a chances that the people will be non-violent in character. And then there should be the collaboration and partnership between the states, international donors, and the local communities to achieve the desired result of either getting sustainable development or sustainable peace in the society. So now, briefly, I know I will not take too much time. I'll focus on the case of Afghanistan. So I will just try to link what Dr. Marcus theoretically says about the militarization, securitization, or the geopolitics of the, in the case of Afghanistan, geopolitics theoretically that have the global aid is securitized or being political agenda. So we have witnessed the same thing in the case of Afghanistan. First of all, in 2005, what they did is that they created a PRTs in Afghanistan, to what we refer as provincial reconstruction teams. So in PRTs, in the provincial reconstruction team, 90% of the, after they, focus is more on the security development nexus, in PRTs, 90% of the employees were from the military side. The commander were the military and the orders were from the military. Only 10% were the civilian, and those civilians were the locals. And who were the locals means the Afghanis. And then what happened that they, with the security development nexus, they militarized the aid. So once they militarized the aid, that now every move in Afghanistan, even the development aid was, people start thinking about that with suspicion. They think that it is not because of they are not giving us aid, but they do have some politicized agenda, because military was involved in that. So once military got involved in the development agenda, then they also think the development agenda through the lens of security. They also start thinking about that now army is not only involved in development, but at the same time they have a hidden development agenda. So it's also true that when I was conducting an interview from one of my recent paper that got published, development under the aid of development under the shadow of guns, I found that majority of the aid workers that were working in Afghanistan, they says that yes, basically we were to development was not our agenda, but basically it was to hunt Al-Qaeda. It was to hunt the Taliban. So basically we use the development agenda, or we use the foreign aid is a tool for the politicized agenda. So then when they militarized the aid, so automatically bunkerization of aid came in Pakistan, in Afghanistan. By bunkerization of aid, I means that the aid employees, the donor agencies, the aid givers, in other way, the NGOs, they sit in Kabul under the bunkers, and then they were controlling from where? From virtual, they became a virtual vanguard, and they started controlling from there. And then what happened that when the aid was, a kind of militarized and bunkerized, so in other way, what we see that they couldn't achieve the desired result, and that's why we are seeing in many of the research paper is that the Americans' aid couldn't achieve that result in Afghanistan that was desired the way back in 2003. And same is the case of Pakistan. We have in development intervention, there is an elite consultation, local community has not been involved. There is a centralized plan, and in some of the development intervention, that is a militarized agenda as well. So they have a hidden, security agenda, and they have some political moves. So that's why they are, politicizing the aid as well as, and then if you bring the security agenda into the aid, you also politicize the aid. Thank you. I think that's all from my side.